Hi, this is Jim Robbins, and today I want to talk about two different kinds of preaching. The first kind is the kind you've probably heard all your life, and the second kind is the kind that you wish you had heard all your life. A friend of mine said to me once that because of the particular teaching and preaching he had been hearing at his local church, he expected to sin more. Think about that. The teaching he was hearing led him to believe he was going to sin more, that was an expectation. The expectation wasn't that he would become more holy, that he would be more filled and enabled with the goodness of Jesus, that his heart would be less pinned down by the things that had pinned it down prior to. No, the teaching he was hearing led him to expect to sin. So I want to talk about two kinds of preaching. An old covenant view of preaching, which is unfortunately the preaching most of us have heard most of our lives, and then a new covenant approach to that, to teaching as well. And they're built on incredibly different assumptions about the person. Let me just give you an example of what I'm talking about. And by the way, this can be found in an ebook that I've written a couple years back called No Longer Prone to Wander. And I'll put a link to that on this blog post as well. But here are two different kinds of contrasted preaching. Let's just take different, alleged preaching titles. You might see a sermon in a bulletin. Under an old covenant mentality, you can find sermons titled How to Avoid Temptation. But if we were to preach that message from a new covenant mentality, a contrasting message, a new covenant or new-hearted perspective would be, rather than how to avoid temptation, gratifying your new purity. Okay? Gratifying your new purity. In other words, there's something there that's noble that ought to be drawn out, not simply something to avoid. Most preaching amounts to get people to stop doing something and start doing something else. Sin avoidance, and then take up even more of a yoke. It's not an easy yoke. That most preaching and teaching results in a very heavy yoke, not the easy yoke of Jesus. Because this is about discontinuing, avoiding sin, and then taking on a greater burden of responsibility to produce the righteousness Jesus asked you to. So, how to avoid sin is an old covenant perspective. Gratifying your new purity is a new covenant perspective. Let's just take another sermon title that you might find. Old covenant message, the 7 deadly sins. New covenant message, you no longer want that, whatever that sin temptation might be. Getting to know your deeper desires. In other words, let's take a look at the legitimate desires of your heart, your good heart, that are being perhaps expressed in the flesh in unhealthy ways. But it's not that your heart is unhealthy, it's that your flesh is unhealthy. Let's take another example. Old covenant preaching, becoming a better fill in the blank, spouse, husband, tither, more committed, better praying, spending longer time in prayer, more disciplined, becoming a better something. The new covenant title or approach to that message would be learning to relate from your new heart. Because we say that it's about relationship when we talk about becoming a better, for example, spouse or parent. It's really not. It's about managing people's sin. How about saying learning to relate from your new heart? What are the implications of the new heart and how that might affect your relationships? They are staggering. And I write about that in my book, Recover Your Good Heart. And I kind of flesh out really awful and painful examples I've had where nobody took the new heart seriously, and group dynamics suffered, relationships fell apart, people never said hi to each other again. I cover some of those examples and what it might look like if that had been different and we'd had new heart assumptions about the other Christians in the group. Here's another example. Just do it. In other words, just do your duty. That would be an old covenant message. Just do it, whatever it is. I've heard some, like we borrow the Nike commercial and apply to that Christian duty. Well, the new covenant approach to that, or a new covenant sermon, would be released from pressure. People who are pressured into compliance, into becoming more like Jesus, usually end up either a Pharisee or a completely defeated Christian. And the last kind of example you might expect on the Old Covenant sermon side would be seduced by desire. What we tend to do under the Old Covenant is say all desire is bad. All desire will seduce you and eventually end up in death. Maybe not physical death, maybe not going to hell, certainly, but some kind of spiritual death, some consequence that will bring destruction to your life. Well, the New Covenant approach, and that's not true, by the way. Not all desires are corrupt. The desires of our flesh might be, the desires of our old programming might be, but not the desires of our new nature, our new heart. Those desires are legitimate and ought to be nourished and brought out. And that's, by the way, what God is interested in doing with you. So seduced by desire on the one hand, Old Covenant. On the other hand, New Covenant, contrast to that might be exploring your new appetites. What are those new appetites that are within your new God-given heart? The heart that he gave you when you entered into relationship with Jesus. Said, I will remove your heart of stone. That heart that had the old appetites, that was bent towards sin, that was prone to wander, and I will give you a new heart. Let's explore those desires. That's what God is interested in. That's what God is trying to woo out of you, to draw out of you, to affirm and to put into place through his action in you through the Holy Spirit. So again, we don't need messages that lead people to think they're going to sin more. What we need is messages coming from Christian teachers, leaders, and pastors that say, no, you have a wholly new set of desires that God has implanted in the new heart that he's given you. Our job as leaders is to cooperate with God, to nourish and help release those desires. If you're interested more in what it means to have a good and noble heart through Christ and to live from that and to experience different kinds of relationships, first and foremost with God, you can go to my website, thegoodandnobleheart.com, and you can also take a look at my book there, Recover Your Good Heart. Thanks.